Today we have well over 10,000 active satellites in Earth's orbit. Some, like the USA's Orion spy satellites, others are privately owned, some are used for phones, and some are used for the internet like Starlink. Still, none of this would be possible without the advancements made during the Cold War.
Going back to 1957, with the first satellite ever put into orbit, the Sputnik 1 was a small satellite built and launched by the Soviets. Even though the billions of people who lived during the 1950s didn't know it, the Russians had just built something absolutely revolutionary. The Sputnik 1 had a spherical shape with 2-meter-long antennas branching off in one direction. The purpose of this machine was to collect information on the movement of radio waves in our ionosphere and find out the density of many of our upper layers of the atmosphere. The Sputnik 1 had not been found to have any purpose in terms of collecting information of other countries, so we currently can safely assume that this was an action taken to learn of our world, instead of looking into the secret workings of enemy countries like most satellites are known for these days. Moving away from the purpose of the satellite, the Sputnik 1 floated around our upper atmosphere for just over 3 weeks before a failure in the batteries caused the satellite to stop its transmission of information. It would take a couple more months before the Sputnik 1 began its plummet back to Earth to be collected. The technological revolution brought countries from all over the world into the race of satellite advancements. The Sputnik was just the first of thousands to explore Earth's atmosphere, and because of it, we know that such technology will always be possible, and Earth would not be where it is today at all if it weren't for the Sputnik 1.
As the US entered the race to have a fully functional spy satellite in the atmosphere, they needed a name for the series of satellites that they created, and Keyhole was the name they assigned. This was represented in most of the Cold War satellites as KH followed by the numerical designation of the satellite. These Keyhole satellites were from a different time, a time before we could send images and videos from space to mission control within seconds. The way the photos were retrieved was less reliable, but still effective. Essentially, each satellite was equipped with a drop box, a place where specialized film would be stored after taking the necessary pictures. Once the satellite completed its job, the basket would then detach at a calculated point in orbit to give it the best chance of retrieval. Then, using communication between radar, mission control, and observation posts, a plane, either a C-119J or a JC-130, would use trailing hooks to snatch the container out of the sky. Once secured, the film was rushed to a specialist who then developed the images. This retrieval system was only one of thousands that made up Keyhole satellites' functions, and gives us a glimpse onto just how complicated they are.
During the Cold War, Russia quickly made the first move in terms of satellites, but the US was really not that far behind in the race for control of the atmosphere. The impact that Sputnik 1 had on America was much larger than anyone could even imagine. The fear was real, and the funding of space research increased so that America could really stand a chance in gaining atmospheric control. The response was the corona satellites that would take images thousands of miles of Soviet land, including threats, strongholds, and even targets. These satellites were all instrumental in the Cold War, capturing more ground faster than any plane or spy could at the time. Unfortunately, the success of the Corona was not instantaneous. The first 12 launches attempts were failed, and the 13th was finally successful, but unfortunately it was a test and did not carry out the equipment needed to actually be used as a spy satellite. The lessons learned during the first 13 tests were invaluable and led to the success of the Corona program, which by 1986 grew to include 8 separate variations of satellites at this time. Most of these were designed to cover large areas and determine targets, but a drawback was that many did not have the camera, time, or precision to capture all the details needed. This was the speciality of the Corona subset, the Gambit satellites. Once a target was identified by one of the other satellites, a Gambit would take a closer look identifying key points of interest. With this method, the US located hundreds of Soviet missile silos and secret bases, all the while improving their satellites to be more and more effective and efficient.
Ultimately, these evolutions in satellite technology grew exponentially in the Cold War, and in turn, it pushed our society forward. As the need for spy satellites declined, they were repurposed to create things that we now use hundreds of times a day and have become an essential part of our life and society as a whole. These are things like direct phone calls, GPS, internet, and so much more. Along with that, many lessons learned from the Cold War satellites continue to move science and technology forward, bringing us closer to the stars every single day. Despite the origin of satellites in the Cold War, most being used to watch people all over the world without them ever knowing, these satellites have grown into much more than a fancy spy gadget, affecting our lives forever.